You're listening to Keeping It 100 with Mel and Bruce, sponsored by the 100 Black Men of Las Vegas. What they see is what they'll be. I'm Mel Tiller, your host. I'm thrilled to be with you. And today, ladies and gentlemen, people of Las Vegas, I am going to take you all the way to the East Coast. I am going to take you to some people, my hometown. I'm going to take you all the way to Richmond, Virginia. I'm going to take you to some people who are going to school you today about your history, your Black history. We're going to talk about a film that was produced. It's called Black Wall Street, the money, the music, and the people. I am pleased to welcome to the show the producers and co-producers of that great film. We welcome Roi Boyd. Welcome to the show, Leroy. Roi Boyd III. Welcome to the show, Roy.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Hey,
good morning for you.
Morning for me. Oh, and we have Rebekah Pierece. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, good afternoon.
And of course, we have Yemaja Jubile. Yemaja has been on the show before. She's a friend of the show these days. Welcome once again, Yemaja. Great to have you back.
Thank you for having me once again, Mel, and welcome. And I've almost said something very Southern because I knew you would get it.
Oh, yes. I always embrace being from Emporia, Virginia, growing up in Skippers, and I always love talking to home folks. It is always a great pleasure. And I always love talking to home folks who are doing some things and making a great contribution. This movie that you all have produced, Black Wall Street, the money, the music, and the people, it is fantastic. And so let's start off with the writer. The writer and producer of this movie is Miss Rebekah Pierece. I want you to tell me, how did this idea come to you, and how did it all start?
Well, I have to give the disclaimer. I am not from the South originally. I am from the West, California, but I ended up here in Richmond, Virginia, because I'm prior military. I was stationed out in Hampton Roads, Langley Air Force Base, so I'm an Air Force vet. And so when I came back here in 1999, after I finished my education and my tour, I started teaching English literature. I'm an English lit teacher, self-retired. I retired myself after 22 years because I'm exhausted. But while I was, I started teaching for a local community college, and I was teaching African-American literature part 1, which brings us up to 1865. And then I had another class, part 2, which brought us from 1865 to the present. And I was new to Richmond, and I wanted my students to experience Black history, Black life. So I learned about a place called the Black History Museum here in Richmond. It was on 00 Clay Street at the time. And I took my students there. And again, not being from the South, I didn't even know about a Black History Museum. I had no idea what it was about. And when I took my students, and the museum curator, Maureen, started taking us around, and she stopped in front of this, or rather I stopped in front of this picture of this black and white photo of these beautifully dressed, high-class Black people. And I was like, what is this? And she was like, oh, this is Jackson Ward. And I was like, what's a Jackson Ward? And she was like, you're standing in it. I was like, what do you mean I'm standing in it? And then she just started telling me, the picture was circa 1930s. She started telling me about Jackson Ward and Magdalena Walker. Yes. And I grew up reading mystery novels. I grew up reading Agatha Christie. And so I immediately, my brain started thinking, how would this particular Black community, Jackson Ward, 2nd Street, the Deuce, as it was called at the turn of the 20th century, how would these affluent people of color handle a serial killer in their midst? And I just started thinking about that story, and I went back and I told my students about it, and they were the ones who said, you need to write that book. And so I originally wrote the novel Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders, in 2009, published it in 2010. And my sole objective was to, number one, you know, Richmond, when you talk about Richmond, you guys know, y'all from here, when you hear about Richmond in the South, all they talk about is Richmond from the perspective of slavery, which is fine because I've written another book dealing with that topic matter.
Yeah.
But what's not often talked about is the role that Black Wall Street played in the Harlem Renaissance, prior to the Great Depression. You know, what Richmond's position was, particularly what Jackson Ward's position was during this most pivotal time in American history. And so I wanted to not only tell that story about this affluent, very wealthy community, how they got wealthy, what they were doing, the businesses they were growing, but I also wanted to tell the story of Black men who served in World War I. So Cy Sanford, the protagonist, is a World War I vet. He's a deeply troubled vet. He's from Emporia, Petersburg. He's from that area. And
my hometown, Emporia, I proudly say,
yeah,
you chose a great location. Yes, yes.
Absolutely, the Tri-Cities.
Wonderful choice.
Right, so I'm thinking about all of this Black literature that is not often put into fiction, and Richmond is not often the center of fiction when it comes to talking about early 20th century financial, economic, entrepreneurial industry. And again, when we talk about Black bodies, as we're still having this conversation about the value and worth of Black bodies, this serial killer is killing, you know, poor working class Black women and dumping their bodies throughout the ward. And so I wanted to kind of address that conversation from those different angles. And so that's kind of the idea where the novel came from. And then Roi and Yemaja approached me a couple years later and said, I've had a lot of people approach me and say this needs to be a movie.
Yes.
But I trust Roi because Roi was he's always been one of my directors for my plays. I'm a playwright. And so I knew that he would see what I saw. And then he brought Yemaja on, and it was just like, okay, we're going to do the best we can with what we have, and we're going to tell this story. So
you all did a marvelous job of telling the story. I love the characters. And then you told us about some of the affluent individuals in the community. Roi, you were the narrator, and you talked about the mansion next to the Chitlin Circuit.
The Hippodrome Theater, the mansion
the
next to the
Hippodrome
Hippodrome
Theater. Yes, and you talked about the mansion next to it. Tell us a little bit about that mansion and who owned the mansion.
Well, it's the Taylor Mansion.
Yes.
And it was owned by a gentleman. I cannot remember the organization, but okay. So you're a member of 100 Black Men. We were talking before we got on the air. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. After the Civil War, when we talking about African Americans, we were coming out of that Holocaust and out of that experience. We kind of had a grip on our own self-sufficiency and acquired our own education. So we were able to lift ourselves up to an aristocracy of our own. And with that, you have these fraternal orders and organizations.
Yes.
Okay. Rebekah, do you remember the actual organization?
It was the Brotherhood of, I would have to pull up all the texts, but it was originally owned by a white man. And then there was an incident there, and then it was purchased by this gentleman who was a member of the fraternal order. Oh my God, they were attached somehow to Maggie Lena Walker's bank, but I can't remember the exact name of the order. But there were large fraternal orders at that time.
Yes. Now Maggie L. Walker, who we spoke prominently throughout the film, she was a member of the Independent Order of St. Luke and had the St. Luke Savings Bank at that. So for that mansion to be right next door to the Hippodrome, which was our Apollo Theater of the South.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't help but imagine a lot of the happenings and energy that was going on with those two buildings right next to each other. And Rebekah also educated me about parties on the third floor of a funeral home.
That was the A.D. Price Funeral Home. Yeah, the A.D. Price Funeral Home used to have these stellar balls on their third floor. And a lot of people know, yeah, a lot of people don't know that the A.D. Price Funeral Home was actually one of the first Black funeral homes to be licensed to embalm during that period. So they were pretty entrenched in the community. And that's what people need to understand about the Black Wall Streets. They were all economically entrenched in one another's businesses. So if one succeeded, then they all succeeded in many ways. So the A.D. Price Funeral Home was heavily connected to the hotel industry, the hospitality industry, the entertainment industry, the insurance industry. So, and the brotherhood, the fraternal orders that existed at that time, they made sure that everybody knew what they needed and got involved in some way. So yeah, you in some ways you can't talk about the Hippodrome Theater without talking about the Taylor Mansion, because it's intricately connected, even though today it's separated because the Taylor Mansion is yet another restaurant. But if you want to talk about the Deuce, 2nd Street in the 20s, you have to talk about the Taylor Mansion and its history.
So Yemaja, tell us about this Hippodrome, this must see and must be at stop, this part of the Chitlin circuit. Because often when we think about the Chitlin circuit, we think about poor little juke joints and rundown places and all of that sort of stuff. The Hippodrome was none of that. Tell us about the Hippodrome.
Well, I'm going to have to defer to Rebekah because I do not know I know the building and I've been inside. I've never been to, other than when there was a festival down on the street. So I don't actually know the history. So I'm not going to give you wrong information. I'm going to defer to Rebekah. This was her project. Rebekah, please tell us about the Hippodrome.
So the Hippodrome, I'm sorry, I mean, I did a lot of research for the book. Like if you get the book, you'll see in the back, I have tons of resources because you can't, for me to be a writer who's Black, when you're writing, this book is historic fiction. So meaning the setting is real, but the characters are invented. But I didn't want to write any old novel without educating, because that's how we pitch the book. That's how we pitch the film, as it's edutainment. So in the back of the book, there's tons of resources, right? So please, let's kind of like step back a moment and dismiss the myth that the Chitlin circuit, the stops were dives.
Yes.
That is not accurate. Please don't believe that, because that's what they want us to believe about our history.
Yes.
The stops on the Chitlin circuit from New York all the way up, down, and up to Chicago were well run, well managed, clean, beautiful businesses. And you notice I said businesses.
Yes.
Because they ran those places like businesses. And so in Richmond, the Hippodrome was the premier place to stop in Richmond. I mean, Duke Ellington is here, Paul Robeson, and then we have our Richmond native Bojangles. I mean, up into the 70s, 80s, Michael Jackson, James Brown. I mean, this is where you came, and the Hippodrome was a beautifully decorated place. And one of the things I made sure to do in the book, and that we wanted to hint at, if not showcase in the film, was the beauty of the architecture.
Yes.
Was the beauty that these places were. So when you came to Richmond, Jackson Ward, you weren't coming to the hood at that time. I mean, W.E.B. Du Bois came to Richmond to find out how the Deuce was making all this money, and they were making the equivalent of multi-million dollars from today's perspective.
Repeat that again, please. Repeat that
multi-million,
again.
Multi-million.
W.E.B. Du Bois came here, yes,
to find out what we were
and
doing.
find out how this much money was being made by Black folks.
By a city within a city, because 2nd Street was enclosed, and the city of Richmond was trying to figure it out too. How in the hell are they doing what they're doing? And it's because if you couldn't go shopping at Tallheimer's other than on a Thursday when they allowed Negroes to come in, you had to get your clothing from somewhere. You had to get your meals, your groceries from somewhere. And so it was important that the community was able to provide for itself. So I have to like add on to that disclaimer. I had the privilege and the honor of of interviewing, or rather having the novel read and blessed by Dr. Reverend E.G. McCreary, who was 10 years old living in 2nd Street at that time. And Dr. McCreary, when I met him, was already like 94 years old, and he remembered everything. And so he went through that entire novel to make sure that I was very clear. I had to take out every word that said Black and make it Negro. This is why you hear Roy, as the narrator, refer to everyone as Negro, because Dr. McCreary said, if you're going to write about the period, if you're going to put us in the period, you have to speak like the period. Yes. And so what he made me understand was that I also had the misbelief that Jackson Ward didn't look like it had money, and that the people were not educated. And Reverend Dr. McCreary was like, absolutely not. That's not how it was. That is not how it was. He said, we carried ourselves with pride. Even if you were a maid, you owned a home. We spoke proper English. We expected everyone to adhere to that. And that is why in the film, we try to show you the beautifulness of these Black people in their dress, in their speech, in the kinds of businesses these men and women own. I didn't want to create, and Roy and Yemaja are all about positive Black images. We were not going to put something out there that showed us other than beautiful of that which we are. So let's be clear that when you were on the Chitlin circuit, whether you were coming from Harlem, Baltimore, Richmond, Jacksonville, Greensboro, all the way up to Chicago, you were not coming necessarily to a dive.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, no.
Roy, you were, and you did a marvelous job as the narrator. What stood out to you about this project? What did you learn while being involved in this project?
As I said, so the first thing I learned was you have a funeral establishment and there were swanky parties that were held on the top floor. Also about the armory. Now, we have an armory on Lee Street, which at the time that we filmed that segment, the Black History Museum that Rebekah mentioned earlier, yes, was in the transition of moving into that armory. So they're there now. It's a very beautiful space. And if you come back east, I invite you to yes, go and check it out, okay? That you had this light that would come on at night as sort of an honor or a tribute for the soldiers. Was that
from
right?
Yes, coming in from the Spanish-American War, right. 1890s. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it was built for those men.
Exactly. So just everything that Rebekah talked about, you know, when I moved to Richmond 24 years ago in 1999, people would say to me, don't go to Jackson Ward. And yep, I'm like, why? You know, and okay, well, if you go, you find out, you know. And doing this project, because later on I eventually lived there, but finding out more through this project and working with Rebekah that, you know, this place has a history that has been forgotten. This was the manifestation, personification of the Du Bois philosophy of the talented 10th. And you just can't help but to embrace that and to feel the pride in that. So what's happening today? We are in 2023. We are in a relatively new century. Is, of course, the G word. Do you know what the G word is, Mel?
The G word. No, tell us what the G word is.
Gentrification.
Oh, yes, yes.
Let's say that again, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Gentrification.
Yes.
There you go. There you
go. And Rebekah, I remembered, you know, and I know Yemaja would like to chime in on this as well. but Rebekah, when you were promoting this, and when after everything was edited and we were going to put it out and you were looking for support, it was not positive all the way around. Yes. Okay. And Rebekah always said, and I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to give it to the ladies, but Rebekah always said, if this is going to happen, talk about the gentrification, okay, fine, but we cannot let the history and the stories die.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So tell us, Yemaja, tell us why this story is important. People know about Black Wall Street as far as Tulsa was concerned. People know about Rosewood. They don't necessarily know about all of the Black economic centers that were scattered throughout the United States, including Richmond, Virginia. Why must these stories be told?
So glad you asked that question, because right now in this period of history, the truth with a capital T, TRUTH, which means truth, relentlessly outpouring through our hearts. Through our hearts, we have to tell our stories. We have to bring it in the view, because nobody else wants these stories to be told. And that just gives me the passion to make sure that it's told. Now, when all of this was going on, my dad used to run a restaurant on 2nd Street, all right? I have to mention it. My dad was a part of what was going on, and he was up in Charlotte County, but he was a businessman who knew the value of having a Black-owned business on 2nd Street, okay? That's a connection that I have. And one of the other things about, as I saw this begin to unfold and wanted somewhere so we could have it out to the public, I approached predominantly 2 white churches, all right? I went to 2 Unity churches here in Richmond and talked to them about bringing the movie where everybody could see it. So we premiered with over 325 people, all right, at Unity of Bonaire, Richmond, Virginia, and it was packed. And even the minister, Reverend Joyce, said she had never witnessed so many people coming to her church that night before. We were dressed, we took pictures, we were dressed in the attire of the era.
It was Hollywood, Mel.
Yeah, it was. And then we even had a group with Keith Wallace and this other song that I wrote premiered called Eloise, all right? Eloise premiered, and all of the singers that were behind us, there were lots of people. We had a group, what was the name of the group we had with?
The Flappers and the Jelly Beans.
Yeah, Flappers and the Jelly Beans, right? And we were dressed like it. There were people that came from DC. We had this crowd there that saw
Philadelphia.
That it really was good. And we had white people that for the first time in that audience were educated about what happened on 2nd Street and in the Black Wall Street, the money, the music, and the people. I have to tell you, they were amazed. They were awed because they had no idea. So if it was important then, it's even more important now that we continue. Just like being on this program, when you were asking me about this, I knew Rebekah had to be here and Roy to bring the sense of connectedness, because as I was a part of it, I could smell the truth, I could taste the truth, I could feel the truth, and I could know the truth, right? And you know, they said the truth would set you free, but that's a white statement. I don't want to go there with that, right? It's just knowing our truth empowers us and allows us to influence further generations to come about the wealth, about the power, and about the creative, how we just come through everything and we make everything work.
Yes, we do. Roy, you have some comments.
No, I wanted to just piggyback on what Yemaja was saying about that night. It was a beautiful night. People were turned away at the door. Okay, that's how huge it all was. And we even had a board member of the church, Yemaja remembers, came up to us and tell us after everybody was gone, he said to us, you two bring too many people.
Yes, we bring too many people. Yes.
Oh, that's great. Rebekah, tell us where our listening audience can go to view this film.
Well, it's on our YouTube channel for RLP Productions, and that's my initial, Rebekah Lynn Pierce Productions. So RLP Productions, they can go to our YouTube channel and watch it there. But more than anything, I want to encourage people to, I'm a lit teacher. I'm a teacher for life. Read the book first, because there's a lot that's in the book that we could not put in the film. And if you have the reference from the book, then the film makes sense. You know, how the reason why we decided to do, you know, the combination of documentary and film, why I had a narrator and then showed you clips from it, because there's so much that is in the book that a lot of people don't know. And I've had people for years come specifically to Richmond just to take the tour. Like every place that's mentioned in the novel, you know, people have come to see. Some of it is still here, some of it has been turned into something else. But I just firmly believe that to know where we're going, we have to know where we've been. And if you want, you know, you can see the film. It's free on our YouTube channel. We would have loved to have had more support for it in other ways, but it is what it is, because our whole goal was to leave breadcrumbs. And so I believe that Richmond has a treasure in its own backyard. And it's my hope that young people will begin to unearth that treasure outside of just slavery, but unearth it and present it in different artistic means or fashion that tells the story in those different ways. And so I would encourage you to read the novel. You can grab that on Amazon, anywhere you want, Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders, and then watch the film on YouTube and, you know, go from there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you can find this film on YouTube. It's called Black Wall Street: The Money, the Music, and the People. Why is this important? It is important because our story must be told. And for those of you who do not know, there is a similar documentary, a similar movie being made about Las Vegas, the West Side. We've had that film director on our show, and he is filming that as we speak. It is an exciting time in Black history. It is important because there are those who are trying to whitewash our history.
May I add something?
Yes, go right ahead.
Actually, I want to share something really quick. This is what I mean about works breathing life. I think I told Roy, or did I tell you, Maja? We are now working on a comic book graphic novel for Cy Sanford for Murder on 2nd Street.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
We're going to introduce, we want to introduce this in another medium.
Listen, this is so fantastic. These things are happening right now. It is important. It's relevant right now. In the state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis is trying to whitewash our history. He is getting rid of AP Black history courses. That is happening today. This is not hyperbole. Our history is important. And if we want to keep our history, we must tell our own stories, because the story that's being told to children in Florida and other places, that's not our history. That's not our story. That's someone else articulating something that they're calling our story, and it whitewashes our story.
Can I interject something, please?
Yes.
I am a member of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, and Steve Williams is the president of that. And he asked us on the meeting on Saturday to stop using the word slave in any narrative that we do. Use enslaved, because when you use the word slave, it degrades us to what they want us to say about us. So use the word enslaved. We were enslaved. So I want to pass that on to your audience. That is very, very important. About the language that we use. You know, I'm about language and words. All right.
So noun to verb.
Yes. Enslaved. We were enslaved. We were not slaves.
Listen, I want to thank you all so much. This history lesson is important. The work that you all are doing is important. We care about it. We need it. You all are making your contributions to our community. I want to thank once again our guest, Mr. Roi Boyd III. He was the narrator and did a fantastic job. Make sure you go and see this movie on YouTube. The producer, Ms. Rebekah Pierece, the co-producer, Ms. Yemaja Jubile, and they have graciously given us our time and given us a school lesson today on Black history. And I love it because these folks are from my home state and from Richmond, Virginia. Each of you will have to come back very soon. You've been listening to Keeping It 100 with Mel and Bruce, sponsored by the 100 Black Men of Las Vegas. What they see is what they'll be. I'm Mel Tiller, your host, and that's Keeping It 100.